other patron has a really fun name. I'm excited to say.
Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week, we get to disprove yet another one of Eliot's theories that he made at the beginning of the book. In episode 145, here we are ending part 4 of The Final Empire. Eliot, how are you?
Sad, overwhelmed, shocked. Shocked's a good word. Shocked.
Shocked. Paul?
Wow. We've been flying through this book, and I'm really excited to get. This is like one of the big things that it's a major spoiler that we've tried to hide from Eliot. I feel like, at least as far as I've known, been up to this point, and so I'm glad to be here and to talk about it with you guys.
We have been flying through this book. There are several shocking things in this episode, which we will get to, which lead to some odd questions moving forward, which we will also get to. But before we do that, we will roll intro and then do Eliot's chapter summary so we can stop talking so in such vague terms. So go ahead and roll the intro.
That was more of the GameCube intro. I have no idea what our music sounds. Well, I do know what our music sounds like, but at the same time, I don't. I'm gonna go ahead and intro us in, Trevor. I want to talk about my mug. So this week we have a new surgeon. Yes, surgeon. I'm extremely confident of that, and I had a lot of fun writing this name. It's like a culmination of words. So much thank you to Hydro Snow Stormlock. I really need to I'm gonna start having someone just help me to write stuff because this is horrible.
I
I
can
can
read
read
it.
it right here in front of my face, but I feel like looking at my camera, it's unreadable. It is also reflected for me, so it's backwards. Me looking at my camera, so maybe that's why. Anyways, on the mug today, I put your name actually on the back because I didn't want to cover up the beautiful front of it. My mug is a very beautiful floral arrangement, and it says "Find me in the garden," which I thought was very,
Aww.
I don't know, just very peaceful. As one of my wife's mugs, if you can't tell. Um, and so yes, so I guess Mister or Mrs. or Hydro Snow Stormlock, I will. You can find me in the garden. So
Is that an invitation?
thank you. Just saying where you could hypothetically find me
Oh,
in
okay.
the garden.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Hydro Snowstorm Lock. Go
Yes,
ahead,
yes. Thank you.
Eliot, with our
Say
chapter
that 10
summary.
times fast.
I do have some chapter summaries for our rather momentous chapters 32, 33, and 34. We start off with fully in the Sanderlanche at this point. Vin and Kelsier go to a rendezvous with Marsh, and they find a dead corpse instead.
Yes.
So the crew scrambles to enact some of their backup plans, and they fall back to the backup hideout. All kinds of stuff. Things are not going well. Helsier takes off to the pits of Hatsin and decides to strike back, I suppose, and manages to destroy most or all of the atium crystals in the mines. He comes back the next day or maybe a couple days later, and they find out fairly quickly that the ministry is striking back against that and is going to do some executions. And they find that Renew and Spook are among those that have been captured and are headed to the executions. So Kelsier leaps into action and they attack and try and save Renew and Spook and the rest of the captives from the ministry. Enter a bunch of soldiers and inquisitors, and full on battle ensues. Talk more about the details of that in a second, but Kelsier does manage to slay the Inquisitor that he's fighting. And then the Lord Ruler arrives. And well, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know what happens next. So we'll just talk about it when we get to that chapter.
Sounds good. All right. I'll start with Marsh. Eliot. I guess this isn't actually applicable because Marsh technically wasn't in the room yet. He was about to walk in. But you said that everyone in the room will survive the end of this book. Yet another casualty in chapter 32. How we feeling?
Yeah, not so great. Yeah, if you do include Marsh in there, which I I don't remember if I intended Marsh to be included in that or not, but if you do include Marsh, since he was standing outside the door when I made that prediction, there was what, like 8, 9 people in the room there. By the end of these chapters, we've lost 3, I think, of those people.
Not great odds.
Yeah, not good numbers when I said none, and it was really third of everyone in the room. Ouch.
Does that surprise you, that number?
It does a lot, actually, but for reasons that are slightly spoilery for other things. So I can share more thoughts on that in our Stormlight spoiler section.
Sounds good.
I will say this is like kind of shocking. You know, like it is part 4. I feel like you usually expect such a big moment like this like at the very end of the book, you know. So, I mean, Eliot was saying his odds he was a little off on his prediction. There's still opportunity for it to become more off. So, you know, I'm sorry. But yeah, we
I
still have another part left in the book, which is kind of crazy.
I will come to my defense slightly and say you're absolutely right. There is opportunity for my prediction to get even worse. There is there is a small chance, I think, for my prediction to get it slightly better. In that I've watched enough fantasy TV shows to know that if you don't get positive identification of the body, there's always a possibility of that character coming back in
Did
the
they
future.
die on screen?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Uh,
If
so
you
true.
didn't watch the character die, if you didn't get like the correct musical score in the background, you can actually tell a lot about whether a character is going to come back based on the music that you get in the moment that they die. Think about that next time you see a TV show character die.
Interesting. I've never thought about that.
Marsh, if you get something that's like slightly satisfying, like it's sad, but there's like a closure to it, character's done, not coming back. If there's any kind of like tense, like, you know, angriness in the music or uncertainty, or like you can tell the music is trying to sell it a little too hard, yeah, that character's coming back for sure. All that to say,
I'm not sure I
all that
believe
to
you.
say, go try it. Go
I
watch.
will.
It has to be a fairly cheesy TV show. Like the best TV shows have more well thought out plots, but the ones that are like really trying to, hook, line, or sinker you
I
on a character
I guess I
dying.
was unfairly. Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on. Gandalf was the exception, which was what I went to in my brain, and I was like, that is a very convincing music score when Gandalf. Anyway, moving on.
All that to say, Marsh. As I'm reading this section, it is likely Marsh that is dead here. They've come to meet with him. There's a dead body in the room. However, there is a note here that Vin sees the corpse and is like, man, you can hardly tell that's a human anymore. Like that right there is like a little bit okay. The door's cracked. The door's a little bit open, and that we didn't identify that it was Marsh,
Right.
even though it probably is. So I'm ready to be sad for Marsh, but I'm also ready for maybe a little hope for my theory that's already squashed.
There is positive identification of another corpse later on in this episode, so I'm not sure I've hoped
Yes.
for that one very highly. But yes, Marsh is declared dead at the scene, and Kelsier, rightfully so, goes on a revenge rampage and says, I'll be back later, move everybody from the lair, emergency mode, go. And last episode, I got on my little soap opera, no, yeah, no.
Soapbox.
There you go, thank you. I got on my little stool and said, wow, Brandon Sanderson really earned this moment with Vin and her ATM, and it's really cool, and I really appreciated that. Kelsier, at the end of this chapter and at the beginning of 33, runs off into the smoke, into the mist, and destroys all ATM geodes using allomancy, and that's the reason why the House Venture can't use allomancers to mine. That's the line we get, because allomancy shatters ATM geodes. Where did that come from? Why is that an option? Where was that? Was that foreshadowed anywhere?
I don't think it was foreshadowed anywhere, but I never thought anything was wrong with it until you kind of point that out. That is kind of like an odd amount of power that one person could have
Yeah.
if you have elementic powers to go in there and just like rip up the whole thing. I think what I remember it showcasing also was like you wouldn't be able to really maybe know where they are and do that if you hadn't like been a prisoner in the pits.
Sure.
Is that right? I
And
could be wrong on that.
it's
but
also possible that the reason Kelsier knows this is because he snapped in the pits. And then he maybe
Mhm.
accidentally popped an ATM geode and was like, that was weird. I want to see that. I wanted to know that before this scene. Because this seems really convenient. I can destroy the entire wealth of the Empire overnight, and I just haven't done it yet because I haven't been mad enough to do it. Not like crazy. I mean like emotional. Because that's what he does, right?
I brushed it off because I was a little embarrassed that I hadn't thought about this before. It's it does kind of strike you as a little bit out of the blue. I felt a little bit that way, but it does answer a question that I should have asked before this point, which is why do you mine ATM with manual labor when you have allomancers?
Huh.
If you can just get iron pullers to come a big group of them and just zoop, suck all the ATM out of the ground, that'd be way easier than getting all this slave labor. And so having a reason for why that's not possible and why they do need all this slave labor seemed necessary in that moment. So when the kind of that information dropped, it was like, oh yeah, I should have been asking that question already, and there's the answer to the question that I should have asked that I hadn't. But you're right. It is a little bit kind of where did that come from?
And part of the reason why I'm being a little pretty critical here is because that was the entire point of the army. If you remember back in the plan, the whole point of the army was to attack the pits, right? Not or pretend to attack the pits.
Well, it was attack the pits, but for the sole purpose of getting the army out of
Okay.
Luthadel.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
It it didn't
Excuse on that
have
one.
much to do, yeah, with the pits themselves. But I still think you might have a point of it's a little surprising Kelsier hasn't done this already.
Right.
He I could definitely see an argument for I'm sure Kelsier would understand the need for ATM. If he goes and destroys the entire reserve of ATM, not only does the ministry not get ATM, but now Kelsier's not going to be able to get a hold of ATM either.
Right.
And, other Mistborns. And so maybe like rational Kelsier doesn't do this, but then we know that Kelsier is rather impulsive sometimes. And so I on a night where Kelsier's had one too many drinks and is sad and, thinking back to his terrible days in the pits, like that Kelsier runs off and destroys the pits of Hathsin just because he can, sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, maybe a little surprised that he hasn't done that already.
That's fair. Well, one thing I do want to point out about this scene in kind of a positive light is I love how this was actually told. This happening was actually told. I like that we really got a good, like a much better and vivid image of the pits from an external source.
Waylon.
Yes, Waylon. I was trying to remember the name. I was like, was it Wendell? Something like that.
This name sticks in my
Waylon.
head because it is named after Michael Whalen, who does the cover art for the Stormlight Archive. So his name is
Interesting.
Whalen.
That is neat. However, I feel like if I was going to ever be the namesake of a character, I wouldn't want it to be the old guy who's crawling in the pits. Like I feel like Anyways, we see
And
Waylon in the pits, and he's like really on his last legs because it's like his last opportunity he has to get one of these geodes to just live another 7 days. Like you kind of see how destitute it is as one of these like slaves in Hath Sin. And then he comes up to the surface, and then everyone's like dead, and Kelsier's like, "Get out of here!" Like,
Yeah.
go open up that geode, take the beat of ATM, go make yourself a new life. Which is I thought was really cool to see.
It's like an interlude.
It was like taking a step away from everything that we've seen right here, and just like looking at something else and learning a lot about the pits of Hath Sin. And seeing this, it wasn't just like off screen. Where I feel like a lot of Kelsier stuff happens off screen. He's like, I'm gonna go kill a nobleman, and it's like, it's okay. See you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that.
Is
Also, full confession, full confession. I at one point, so I think I stopped listening to the audiobook, and like when I came back, I was starting right at the start where it's Wayland's perspective, and for a decent while I thought this was like a flashback where we were seeing Kelsier in the pits, or like no, not Kelsier in the pits, like Kelsier's escape from the pits.
Okay.
Like Wayland comes up, and whatever the heck has happened, Kelsier's gone crazy and unleashed on a lot of people, and he's like fleeing the pits, but he's like freeing people on the way, kind of thing. So I definitely thought it was that for a second, and not him just running back to go destroy the pits. Anyways, I got mixed up there for a second, but it was just a second.
is this the part where Trevor tells us that Waylon is a world hopper?
Not to my knowledge. Sorry.
Uh-huh. He's got that look in his face.
You want me
I've
to?
seen that before.
I can compromise it real quick. You want me to? You want me to look it up?
It's probably if it is a spoilery and we can't talk about it anyway, but I
I
don't believe you.
I
He's not.
I do think this is just random guy A, but I could be wrong. Feasible.
He's probably Light Song.
That's a blast from the past. All right. Anything more from 32 before we jump into yet another action sequence for part 4? All right. So
More action.
while Kelsier is away, actually, I think he's back and sleeping at this point. Sazed and Vin have a conversation about legends and histories and stuff like that. And Vin asks Sazed, "Have you heard of the 11th metal? Because I had never heard of the 11th metal." And Sazed, Mr. History Buff Sazed, says, "No, I had never heard of the 11th metal. And I wouldn't let that scare you because it's feasible that I haven't heard of it. But, yeah. So, what are you guys' thoughts on the 11th metal not even being known to our terracemen?"
I didn't put too many thoughts into it. I don't know. I feel like there's enough simple explanations for that potentially. Maybe Stazed's heard about it under another name, or I don't know. It seems like there's potentially gaps in what Sazed knows anyway. He had quite a bit of information about like ferrochemy recently, but it's not like he has all the answers. There's been times
Right.
before where Vin has asked him questions and he's like, I have a lot of knowledge, but I don't know. It didn't surprise me.
It doesn't discredit the credibility of the 11th metal to you at all? It did to me.
I I don't know. Maybe I just have too much blind faith in Kelsier.
Oh boy. Got
So-
news for you next chapter.
I will say, so from a storytelling perspective, I feel like it would be weird here if he did know and was just like, oh yeah, this is what it does. It's been used here, here, and here, or something like that. If we
Yeah.
like we as the reader are wanting to see that like big reveal from Kelsier, who's like been effectively like hyping it up, right? He's like, this is how we can defeat the Lord Ruler and overthrow everything and win. That's how we're gonna beat the bad guys. This 11th metal. It's big mystery to us, and everyone's like, what does it do? And he's like, well, I don't know. Which is just really funny, right? But if we had that kind of buildup where we know that the 11th metal is a thing that Kelsier is banking everything on, and then it just comes in right here, and Ven is like, "Do you know about it?" Says it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I do. It does this." Then that would be really really lame.
Sure.
Um,
I guess I
I
hadn't thought of it. Yeah, I agree
honestly,
with you.
I honestly kind of wish he hadn't even asked. I feel like because like for that reason, I think the answer has to be no. Like whether or not says it hypothetically knows. I think from a storytelling point, like he could say like, "Oh, it's rumored to do this," I guess, or something like that. But I don't know.
I feel like there's enough unanswered questions about allomancy in general now at this point. Like, why does Vin get to break the rules? Sorts of things that I'm fully expecting there to be quite a bit about allomancy that our characters don't understand.
Yeah.
They've talked through these metals like, oh, there's 8 and exactly 8 metals. Well, except for the other 2 that also do this, and then there's also the 11th metal. Like, I'm fully expecting that conversation to go on and on and on. Well, there's also aluminum and silver and all these other metals out there that we know of that do special things that maybe aluminum does have allomantic powers and our characters just don't know about it yet. Or maybe there's other metals we haven't even talked about yet that there's stuff out there. So for there to be an 11th metal that Kelsier knows something about that, our wise says it doesn't strike me as odd. I'm expecting there's going to be more metals that these guys also don't know about.
Pretty good prediction.
Imagine if we world hopped to Scadrial and showed them the periodic table. They just like flip out. Be like, "Holy smokes, we thought they were just like 10 or 11 or
You think
whatever,
you could like burn helium? Or
Well, that's not like a metal,
I know,
that's
that's
a
what I'm
gas.
saying. Like could
I was thinking like, does like uranium or like mercury count or like
before or after it kills you?
after?
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways,
All right.
I see what you mean, Elliot. I kind of agree with that. Of like, it seems like there's definitely missing pieces that our characters don't know. It's not just a mystery to the reader.
Right.
Okay. Here we go. We are trying to free Spook and Renew from the prison carts, which we actually successfully do. But we haven't said it yet, but here goes. Kelsier gets slapped to death.
The end.
The
I think
end.
that's it. That's actually all it says. It was a weird chapter. No, so
Hey, y'all read a different book.
We read the abridged version.
yeah. Yeah.
So, Eliot, you're the only one who didn't see this coming. I assume you were planning on Kelsier living to the end of the book?
Oh yeah, fully. Didn't see this coming as the understatement of this book so far. It wasn't necessarily overly emotional for me, in that I almost haven't had enough time to get emotionally connected to Kelsier. I half the time don't particularly like the guy anyway. I very much have met my prediction early on of Kelsier is going to be a polarizing figure. There's elements of Kelsier I think are awesome. There are other elements of Kelsier that I'm like, blech, no thanks.
Yeah.
And so to see him die was shocking. I did not expect that at all. At all. For him to be such a pivotal character, the the driving force of all of this. This is all Kelsier's idea. This is all his initiative. There's other ska out there who maybe wish that one day things would change. No, Kelsier is the only one, Marsh, I guess, standing up and saying, "No, I'm going to make a difference. I am going to I'm going to contribute something to this world and make it a better place when I go." To have that character who is the driving force behind the story be the one that dies at what I'm assuming is the climax of the story here. Like, that is, wow, surprising. Very surprising to me.
Yeah.
So I want to take a brief moment to kind of set the scene a little more. So you have a good point of like what we've talked about so far is like Kelsier is kind of uh polarizing morally or maybe ethically or we've had those whole discussions, right? But for the context, like for the purpose of discussing this chapter, we're just going to assume he's a super awesome hero, which in this case he really is. Like this is a moment where he just shines.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it is incredible. So I always, thinking of the picturing, like the angling of this chapter, we're kind of through the eyes of Vin, like watching this kind of unfold, or from the crew, kind of watching this unfold, and it's just a moment where I don't know. It feels like Kelsier's just fed up, so he basically just hops into the ring, and there's an Inquisitor, and he basically is just like, "I'm not running. Like I am going to just do this." And I think the imagery definitely got me way more on this read than the previous one of how masterful Kelsier was with allomancy and everything of just being a Mistborn, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about like how Mistborn have so many tools in their belt that like it's gonna be difficult to know what to use, but he used like all of them together. I love the depiction. So it talks about how he's using steel and iron to like push and pull, like just a ton of items at once, where they're just like all rotating around him, and he's just like flying, like hovering the whole time, like floating around by just doing a ton of different like pushes and pulls, and then also pushing items like to hit the Inquisitor, and the Inquisitor's getting like frustrated and all this stuff, and then ultimately like actually bringing down an Inquisitor, which I appreciate how Brandon Sanderson did a good job of making these Inquisitors like actually really scary and menacing throughout the book, where this is actually a really big deal.
Yeah.
Like if it's like, I feel like most stories and movies you see, it's like, oh, there's the normal bad guys who are a breeze for our main characters, and then there's the big bad guy who's like challenging, but they do it, and then the big showdown at the end is like, oh, there's two of them this time, or there's
Right.
three of them this time, right? But like here we are at like kind of the pinnacle, like a climax moment, and the big victory is that one, Kelsier didn't die to an Inquisitor, and two, Kelsier actually was able to kill an Inquisitor, which people did not think was really possible.
Yeah.
We kind of learned that it like hypothetically could be, but like no one's ever seen it. No one's really heard of anyone killing an Inquisitor.
I,
And
it
like,
was like 8 chapters ago that they were asking if Inquisitors are immortal, or if they've been cycling through Inquisitors. So that
yeah,
is the level of intangible that we're talking about. So yeah, I agree with you.
yeah, and how Vin kind of takes a moment because she had talked about how like there were times when she learned like steel and iron, like pushing and pulling from Kelsier, and almost thought he was kind of an amateur, like not a master, if you will, of that. And then here she was like, "Oh, I was so wrong. Like he is so incredibly skilled and honed and everything." And just Brandon Sanderson does an excellent job with the visuals here of these like action sequences, like the flying around, like all the stuff. I was on the edge of my seat like through the whole scene, which I absolutely love. Um, and then like after this grueling battle with an Inquisitor, Kelsier finally like wins that, and then steps up, and then we see the Lord Ruler. And I kind of want to pass the mic over to Eliot to just hear what you think. I like they. It's I love this scene. It might be my favorite scene in the whole book. It's just like I can picture it so vividly. He like steps out of the cart, and it's this like younger man who's just um. We'll talk about it more in our like overall like spoilers included for other Sanderson books, but there's other characters whose descriptions remind me a little bit of him. And anyways, there's just like a lot of crazy stuff. He's just so cool. So like power, like people can just like feel the power radiating from him, kind of thing. Anyways, I could go on and on, but I'm curious to know what you thought about this, Elliot.
I felt the gravitas of this scene also. It was almost more powerful in the fact that it was fairly simple in a way. Like the Lord Ruler rides up in his carriage and he steps out and it's not some grotesque or alien being. It's not, and a cloud of dark mist spilled out of the carriage with him. No, it's just a man. It's just a young, fit, fairly attractive man who steps out of the carriage and just casually, almost nonchalantly walks towards Kelsier and deals with the situation, like just the control, like the utter control this person has
Yep.
of the entire situation, the scene. It's not overdone, it's not overstated. And I mean from like the character's perspective. He's not an over the top type of persona here. It almost adds to the menace of it all. It's the it's not the it it doesn't come off as the evil, crazy demon thing. It's like, no, this is a normal person, and that's freakier.
Yeah.
It is, and even to add to what you're saying, the things that he does that are really menacing are like small details, right? We've talked about
Mhm.
how like he wears all these rings to just say like I'm gonna wear metal and you still can't do it. You can't compete with me, even though I'm
Right.
kind of making myself a target if I were a normal person, right? Um, just like the things like that. It's like accessories uh, that like convey a lot of his strength. It's not like billowing smoke or breathing fire or like,
Mhm.
really, really crazy stuff. Not to mention he's walking and doesn't even break stride. Takes like two spears like through the back and chest. Like doesn't break stride, does not care. That's like such a just a I mean, it just shows like how powerful he is, like beyond what people think could be possible.
Yeah, it's very impactful in that I don't think we've seen any characters who can do that. Like it's not like your Alamancer can take a spear through the chest and just keep walking. Like
Right.
we've seen Alamancy do some powerful things. If you're hyped up on pewter, you can take some damage. We've seen that in our Mistborn battles, but not like this. This is like a whole nother level. This is the only thing we've seen similar to this is the Inquisitors. And the Inquisitors can seem to take a ton of damage and still keep going. But even this seems to be on a whole nother level. It's like, oh, you just impaled my entire body on your spear. Bummer. I'll deal with it later. And just walks on like, dang, this is a powerful being.
His but a scratch, merely a flesh wound.
Flesh wound.
The
And then
good
he
old Monty Python. Anyways,
and then after slapping Kelsier, he pulls the spear out of his own chest and rams it into Kelsier like whew, dang.
Did you guys catch what Kelsier says to the Lord Ruler before the slap of death?
I did.
I thought it was great. At least the last little bit that he kind of ends with. I don't recall off the top of my head the entire sentence that he says, but he ends it with "I am hope" or something
I
similar to that.
I am what you have never been able to snuff out. I am hope.
Yeah.
And he says
What
it
a
loud enough so the whole court or the whole courtyard can hear
Yep.
it. He's really
Yep.
making a martyr of himself here.
That that is exactly the word that I had on the tip of my brain but hadn't quite formed into a word yet. It's a it is almost like a these people need that spark. They need that push to rise up against not just the societal oppression, but the actual magical oppression that they're underneath as well. Helsier's been that force this entire time, and so to end his moment here with "I am hope" was just so it fit all very nicely together. A well crafted moment and character here for Kelsier. But yet at the same time, as I was ranting about a moment ago, still shocking to me. Still shocking that Brandon Sanderson is going to cash that in now. It doesn't feel wrong. It doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel forced. It feels meaningful. But it's just like, wow, Brandon's going all in book 1. That like this is a moment I was thinking for book 3.
Yeah.
And here it is in book 1. And we're not even done with the book yet. We still have a whole nother part to go.
Yeah.
There's 100 pages left.
So there's a Brandon Sanderson lecture video that he talks to new writers and advice for specifically new fantasy writers, and that's one of his key points of advice is use everything in your arsenal in your first book. If you have something that you know is good, use it. Don't be afraid of using up something, because you will always come up with something better and stronger later. Always cash in what you have and what you are building now. If you have something powerful to write it. Don't let the reader, or don't make the reader wait for it, because you will always have something more to say, or at least he has. That's his advice, which I 100% felt rereading Mistborn here, and we're not done as well, but I also felt that way of, wow, that's a powerful line to use at part 4 of your first book in Mistborn. 100% agree. Did you guys catch Kelsier's last words to Vin?
Is this like back a whole chapter?
Yes. So with the context of Kelsier dying in chapter 34, I went back and read the last thing that Kelsier actually tells Vin. Obviously, neither of them knowing, maybe Kelsier knowing, but neither of them knowing that it's going to be the last thing he says to her. And Vin tells him, you can't do this. We're not immortal. You need to pull back and let Spook die. And Kelsier turns to her and says, there are things that you will need to learn about friendship, Vin. I hope one day that you can see it. And then he turns and runs to save Spook, which I think is a perfect line for Vin specifically in this book. We've talked a couple times about Vin not feeling a part of the group, and then she does finally feel a part of the group, and friendship and what that can mean. I think that's really important for Vin to hear, that there are things that are worth doing for people, that you should be laying down your life for your friends, and that is worth doing. Because that is a concept that Vin does not understand. Why would I sacrifice myself to save this other person? There are people in the world worth fighting for and worth laying down your life for. And Kelsier's saying Spook is one of those people. So this is what I'm going to do. I think that's a great line for Vin's arc here.
I don't think I put enough thought into that. That is a really interesting element of that. And I think it's so meaningful because of what happens in the following chapter.
Right.
I think that's why I didn't think about it, is in that moment, it's okay, yeah, a little less about friendship or whatever that is, moving on. But the fact that that is the last words that Kelsier says and then follows up with his actions
Yes.
in the next chapter is, wow, you're absolutely right at what a potentially pivotal moment could be for Vin.
Anything else, gentlemen?
Not that I can talk about here without referencing other stories.
All right. With that, we are going to go into Stormlight stuff, but real quick, we are finishing the book next week. So if you are just reading Mistborn, haven't read Stormlight yet, we are going to be finishing the book and talking about all of part 5 next week. The week following, we will be doing a full book wrap up. And then following that, we are going to be doing a little bit of a detour, which we'll get into more later. But
Four. You gave me my cue and I missed it. I whiffed it. Strikeout. I'm gonna save it. There is one more thing before we say goodbye to our Mistborn people, and that is we did wrap up part 4, and as you're saying, next week we'll close out the book. I do have a theme for part 4 that I wanted to visit
oh
real
yeah,
quickly before we move on. And I think I may have said this before. I'm struggling with the themes, with trying to put a theme on some of these parts for Mistborn. Stormlight was a little more. I think there's just more there, so there was more for me to kind of tie different things to.
Thicker
I feel like
book.
the story, yeah, I feel like the story is a little more fast paced and moving, and that when I put a theme on, sometimes it's a little bit forced. I'm gonna stick with it though. We'll see if I keep it for future Mistborn books or not. But I got to close out this book with it. Part 4 that we just wrapped up had some really interesting bits of the story, and it ends really on a kind of a downer, but an inspiring moment at the same time that we just talked about with Kelsier and Marsh and some big characters going down. But as I was going back and looking through my notes, the theme that actually stuck out to me based on a couple of different moments was actually love. And not in like maybe the obvious sense of love, not necessarily the purely romantic love or even the love between family members. It was almost like a reluctant love. It was almost like a, "Man, I don't want to love you, but I do." And there were a couple of moments of this. There was discussion about Kelsier and Mare and their relationship and just kind of this kind of sad love almost associated there. There's a moment where Vin goes with Kelsier to visit a ska, just like housing department where he's just kind of talking with the ska and giving them food and things like that. Vin has a moment where she realized she's like, "Man, Kelsier really loves these people. He sometimes is rash, he sometimes he's emotional, but he also really serves them. He really is, passionate for this cause and loves them." Vin also has a relationship she's built up with Elend, and Elend loves Vin. I don't know that he said that yet, but he learns that she's a thief, and he's like, "Oh, okay. At least she wasn't trying to manipulate me, or take me down or whatever it was." That there was an element there of kind of almost this reluctant love, and Vin feels the same. She has a awkward conversation with Spook at one moment where she gives him the classic "It's not you, it's me" line. Poor Spook. But it basically is saying that, "Man, that Ellen guy really frustrates me. I can't stand him, but I love him whether I want to or not." And then the real kind of gut clenching moment was Vin having some thoughts. I think it's at the very end of this chapter. Maybe it's kind of mixed in there a little bit too. She revisits her thoughts about her brother Reen and how he abused her, like straight up literally abused her. And yet she reflects in one of these chapters that she still loves him. She still feels a love for him despite what he did to her.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the common theme that I picked up through this chapter, which was kind of an odd one based on the momentous events that happened here. But
That
yeah.
is a really wholesome one, though, considering the previous parts that we've covered. It's
Yes.
always been like, how do we get something pretty out of this? You know?
Right.
I'm very curious to what part 5, what the flavor or the theme of part 5 is going to be, because you're right. The first 3 parts were like agony and depression. I don't remember what exactly my theme song
Yeah.
was. Go back and look. But they were
Yeah.
really dark. They were really, like oppression and just not pleasant things. And yet this one in still classic Mistborn fashion has kind of a darker side to it, but it was a bit of a positive upswing of we're starting to see some threads of this love and this sacrifice coming through,
Yeah.
which was interesting. Where's this going? There's still a whole other part here. Where's this going?
Great question. Um, anything else for before we do a little bit of Stormlight stuff?
Now I'm done for sure, for real. Ready.
Sounds good. So when we were making this outline, I didn't think we had that much Stormlight stuff, but as we were talking, some thoughts appeared. Anyone want to start?
That's usually how it goes. I'll actually start with this. Um, yeah, I got to thinking whenever we were talking about how we're kind of learning alongside our characters here about Allomancy. It's like a lot of stuff we're explained, like these people obviously know more than we do initially, right? But it seems like there's stuff that they don't know. This like whole 11th metal thing. Um, just there's, definitely plenty of stuff that they don't know. And it made me think back to there's like 3 time eras in Sanderson's writing, isn't there? Am I right? There's some kind of like stage or whatever, right?
Uh-huh. Depending on where you go with this, I will answer the question. Assume you're right and keep
Okay.
going, and then I will
Okay.
correct if I need to.
Okay. For example, we know that there is a Mistborn Era 2,
Yes.
which is like in the future compared to here, right? Like it's multiple years in the future. There's new technology. I haven't read Mistborn Era 2, but there's all sorts of different technology and stuff. And my understanding is that there's supposed to be like an Era 3. And so um just that, like, I'm imagining that as time goes on, these questions will be more commonplace. Like the questions that we have here of like, ooh, what is this? How does this work? There, it's gonna be like, oh yeah, it's just this, or something like that. Like it's gonna make more sense.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of a prediction because I haven't read Era 2. I feel like if I had read Era 2, that would probably be fleshed out. Um, However, that just got me thinking about like other stories as well, like where it is in the like chronological progression of things in this whole universe,
Mm-hmm.
um, and like what characters may know and what we may learn from them, given the time in the whole like overarching big timeline.
So, mildly related. At the time of this recording, about a week ago, there was a live stream, Brandon Sanderson live stream, where he answers some, like, the first half is a non-spoiler segment where you can ask like vague like author questions, and then the second half is spoiler stream where anything that's published you can ask about. And in that second part, they were asking, are we ever going to get an official like published visual timeline of where books are in what year compared to other like planets and stuff? Because you have the Stormlight timeline. How does that line up in the Mistborn timeline? Well, we kind of know, but we kind of don't. Like, is this book like right
Yeah.
after this other one or right before?
Yeah, and like with characters who hop around, like at what
Correct.
time were they at what places?
Which leads to the question of Thydekar, which we'll talk about here in a second, because Thydekar shows up at the beginning of Stormlight, or at least the prologue of Stormlight, and is dead. After, like, Mistborn Era 1 is before Stormlight. That has been confirmed for us. And Kelsier just died. So, like, wait a minute, hold on. Granted, he looks a little different, but anyway. So Brandon Sanderson said that we will likely, before the end of this year, have... no, I'm sorry. Likely after Stormlight 5 is published, he will push an official timeline exactly when each book sits, which will help us theorize quite a bit. But
that will actually be really, really cool to see.
yeah, and it'll involve like all the secret projects and the short stories, and like all of those will have a number on them. But for the context of this conversation, it goes Mistborn Era 1, Stormlight Era 1, Mistborn Era 2, Stormlight Era 2. So in the 30-year gap that we've gotten between Stormlight 1 and Stormlight 2, Mistborn Era 2 happens.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to peel apart this Thydekar Kelsier thing? Or
I want to go there in a second, at least a little bit. Although I fully realize that there's more Mistborn books in front of us, so
yes.
much of what I spew, I'm sure the answer is Raffo.
Correct.
But let me actually start in a slightly different place and say that I predicted at the beginning of this book that no one would die. I actually did not. I wasn't really factoring in my very itty bitty knowledge about the Lord of Scars and Thydekar and all of that. I was mainly basing that on the track record I've seen of Brandon Sanderson so far, which is from like spoilers. Leave now if you don't want to be spoiled because this is a big one. He doesn't kill many characters in Stormlight.
Nobody dies.
Hardly at all. If like any. Like there's a small handful.
The top two that we have,
And it's like minor characters usually.
yeah,
if
Elokar
anyone.
and Tien are the two biggest names.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's always small people like
Yeah.
Dunny.
And
Yeah.
so I'm now thinking about this from like a
Amaram, maybe?
reader's perspective. I realized that I'm reading these series in probably a different order than many.
Sure.
Stormlight first, and then Mistborn. It sounds like the predominantly recommended order is Mistborn and then Stormlight. So I'm walking into Mistborn thinking, oh yeah, Sanderson doesn't kill characters. But everyone else, all the rest of you guys, read Mistborn and then walk into Stormlight, and you're like, when are the character deaths
Who's
coming?
gonna
When are they
die?
coming? When are they coming?
Yeah.
I'm used to losing 3 characters per book. Like, I don't know. I don't really have any questions or anywhere to go with that other than that's the thoughts I'm having is I'm surprised to lose Marsh and Kelsier and that other guy that obviously wasn't that important because can't remember his name.
Yeadon.
Yeah, that one.
I was specifically trying to remember it because I knew someone was going to be like, "Who's the other character?" Because
And
like he
so,
wasn't.
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I don't know, perspective. I am having a perspective. But then the other element of this is the Kelsier Thydekar thing. So I can talk for a second, and if you guys just need to give me blank stares, I'm willing to accept blank stares. And again, massive spoilers all the way through Stormlight Book 5 Prologue. In Stormlight Book 5 Prologue, Knights of Wind and Truth, is that our name now? Knights of
Mhm.
Wind and Truth.
Mm-hmm.
We get the reveal that Thydekar, head of the Ghostbloods, is the Lord of Scars, who we pretty quickly can correlate to Kelsier. Kelsier is the Lord of Scars. We talked about that when we read that episode, is that is a big moment, a huge information drop of here's Kelsier on Roshar. Or we talked about, maybe he's not actually there and it's some kind of projection or magic system that's going on there. So now I'm revisiting that as well. Hang on a second. Is that moment this huge shocker for you guys and everyone else that Kelsier's still alive?
So,
Is that the moment where you're like, man, that character that was dead is all of a sudden back? Like, I thought that was big.
so
Did everyone else in the
I
world
would-
think it was 10 times bigger than I did?
the
I would say Raffo.
when I
Yeah.
when I peeled this out of Paul, I don't know if you remember this, but I read the name the Lord of Scars and turned to
Mhm.
Paul, and he had like this like shocked like
Huh?
that's not a thing. He's dead. Like
No, it felt like a forced question. Like it genuinely felt forced because I had no like reasoning to believe it could be him. Right?
right.
Like, and you were like, "Who's the Lord of Scars?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, if you ask me who the Lord of Scars is, it's him."
Right.
But that doesn't make sense, Like, and
Right.
so I didn't have a big reaction. It wasn't this huge aha moment
Right.
because I was like,
And after Rhythm of War is published, it still took the like all the fan because Lord of Scars is like dropped as a title that Maraise tells, or Shallan tells Maraise that, yeah, I know who your leader is, the Lord of Scars. That's the name drop. And everybody's like, what? And it took a signing session for someone to ask Brandon Sanderson, are you baiting us or is this actually Kelsier? And he said, yes, I intended that to actually be Kelsier. So everybody had the same reaction you did, Paul, of like, what, he's been dead since 2007. Why are you bringing this name up again? So yes, there's some crazy implications that, Eliot, you just got revealed to you backwards, because
Yeah.
he's been dead for 15 years for the rest of us, and so yeah, that's fun.
he looks
And-
pretty different. He's like glowing
And I
blue.
seriously meant, oh yeah, there's that too. And then spikes and stuff through his eyes, which now has more relevance for me as
That
well.
does have relevance. Yeah.
Yes.
And I was perfectly honest with everything I said earlier in this episode with the thematic and story reasons why I'm shocked that Kelsier died in this book. I still all of those things. In addition to the fact that I had seen Kelsier before in a later time frame,
You
and
assumed he was
obviously there's
safe.
no way he. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like of all the characters to lose for so many reasons, Kelsier was not one.
Right.
It is
Yeah.
it is honestly a really, really, really funny mess of like how this information was discovered by each of us. Like
Yes.
And like even the slightly spoilery like reasons too. Like I've been hanging around in the Brandon Sanderson Cosmere fandom long enough that without even reading a single word of Mistborn, the name I associated with it is Kelsier.
Hmm.
Not even Vin. I'd probably heard that name a handful of times, but Kelsier you hear everywhere. It's like Mistborn Kelsier, Mistborn Kelsier. Oh yeah, Kelsier. Oh, you're reading Mistborn Kelsier. To
I mean,
have that
Kelsier was in Fortnite, so like
Kelsier is in
you
Fortnite.
do
stuff
you
like
do that
that.
math, you know?
It was one of those things where like, I'm actively in my life trying to avoid spoilers so that I can read these books, fresh and get the experience of them. But you have conversations with people about them and you just kind of hear names. And it's like, okay, everyone knows about Kelsier. Everyone likes to talk about Kelsier. And then he dies at the end of the first book. Like, what the heck is going on here, people?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm thinking whenever we went to Dragonsteel, like half the people are dressed up as Kelsier.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like
Yeah.
yeah.
And that was Mistborn
He's
book
like-
7, and he died
Yeah,
in book 1.
yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
So
is really
all of that
funny.
to say, shocking moment for all the reasons that we've lost that character.
Yeah. That's really funny. I want to get into some Cosmere mechanics, but I don't think I will. I think I will hold for a while.
I'll toss a minor teasery thing out there, and that I can think of some explanations, but based on what we've explored in the
Mhm.
Cosmere so far, it's not like I'm at a jaw on the floor. How in the world could Kelsier ever come back in the future? There's reasons I can think of that Kelsier can come back in the future.
Right.
So I want to keep reading, and maybe those answers aren't in what I'm about to keep reading, and maybe I need to keep reading in the future into works that have not been published yet. We'll see. But I fully have things I'm going to be on the lookout for. Let's just say that.
Absolutely. Anything else for episode 145, gentlemen?
Nothing. I think I'm emotionally spent after that experience.
I'm so glad that we get to start talking about this stuff finally. This is one of the huge moments that I was really excited for Eliot to get to so that we could talk about it and not have to, keep it secret and safe any longer.
Sounds good. Let us reconvene. We're doing the entirety of part 5. We are ending the book next week through the epilogue all the way, and the week after we will be doing our wrap-up episode. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about this very briefly. If you're curious on our schedule moving forward, we are going to have a little bit of a break. There will still be weekly posts, but we're not immediately jumping into the Well of Ascension the week after our wrap-up episode of this book. We will be doing the 11th Metal, which is a short story on Kelsier, like 2 months after the Pits of Hethsin. That is going to be one episode, and that will be in June sometime. We're going to do a Stormlight Current episode. We are also going to be... There's one other episode I'm not remembering in there as well. And then we are going to be doing Secret Project 3. And we're going to be starting Secret Project 3 at the end of June, because we have part 1 already. So that episode will go live. That first episode on Secret Project 3 will go live pretty much the same day Secret Project 3 is out. And then we will jump right into part 2 right when it comes out and start releasing Secret Project 3 as it's relevant, if that makes sense. So if you lost me, if you lost me there, I apologize, but it might make more sense later. It might not. Thanks for joining me here, Paul and Elliot. We'll reconvene next week.
Blood and ashes. See you next time.